Hey guys, tonight we step into a place that smells of cloves, candle wax, and just the faintest metallic tang of, well, let's call it Tudor freshness. You're in a barber-surgeon's shop, the kind of place where you could get your hair trimmed, a tooth pulled and your elbow lanced, all before lunch. But something catches your eye right away. Above the stained wooden chair and beside the bloodletting bowls, there's a brass cage. Inside, a parrot, bright green, with a beak like a hook and eyes like it's judging your outfit. And then it speaks, not in Latin or English exactly, but a strange, lilting Tudor accent croaks out, "My lord needs more vinegar. Welcome to the odd, overlapping worlds of early modern grooming and gentle animal companionship. You probably won't survive this barber visit, at least not without some leech-related trauma. But don't worry, you're just here to look around. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this from somewhere cozy, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love hearing where these stories reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck through a low doorway, watch your head, the beams old and warped, and step into the curious world of the 16th century London barber-surgeon. It's quieter than you'd expect. The usual moans and muttered prayers are missing today. What you hear instead is a soft, rhythmic crooning, notes that seem too complex for a human throat. There it is, the shop parrot, bright, alert, and clearly enjoying its perch on the crossbeam above the barber's chair. The barber himself, in his leather apron and ruffled sleeves, seems unfazed. He hums along with the bird. You're not sure who taught whom. Barber surgeons in Tudor times were not just snipping bangs and shaping beards. They were jacks of all painful trades. Bloodletting, tooth extraction, minor surgeries, bone setting, and abscess lancing. It was all part of the same price list. And what better distraction for a patient, who couldn't afford anesthesia, mind you, than the melodic nonsense of a tropical bird. Now, the shop doesn't smell as bad as you'd think, thanks to a judicious mix of rosewater, herbs, and possibly the world's first industrial-strength pomander swinging from the barber's belt. It's tolerable. Still, you keep breathing through your mouth. The parrot, meanwhile, has taken a liking to you. Hold. Still, it barks, mimicking the barber's voice. A small laugh from the man behind the chair confirms that the bird isn't just for looks. It's part of the ambiance. And ambiance was surprisingly important in Tudor times. Barbers weren't just medical semi-professionals. They were also neighborhood hubs. Think of them as a weird blend of therapist, pharmacist, stylist, and gossip columnist. Throw in a parrot or two, and you've got the full experience. Historians still argue whether every barber kept exotic birds, or if it was more common among the wealthier practitioners, especially those in London or near the court. But documentation, from paintings, account books, and even a letter from a baffled Venetian diplomat, points to parrots being more than just rare novelties. They were working companions, like emotional support birds, if emotional support meant shrieking things like, "That's infected!" while someone's molar was being yanked. The birds weren't native, of course. These parrots came by ship, some from Africa, some from South America, many from the Canary Islands. Yes, those canaries. That name isn't a coincidence. And the Adari sailors who brought them often taught the birds a few phrases on the voyage, just to sweeten the deal for potential buyers. You shuffle past a rack of razors, all laid out like silver fish, and pause at the water basin. It's been used today. There's a slight pink tinge to the water. But the room feels peaceful, almost cozy. The parrot chirps again, this time something softer. You don't catch the words, but the cadence is like a lullaby in the wrong key. Odd, isn't it? That a place associated with blood and pain would take such care to include a gentle distraction. But in a world before Novocaine, Netflix, or noise-canceling headphones, parrots were one of the few comforts you could import in a cage. Some clients even requested specific birds. "Bring the blue one," they'd say, pointing at the aviary in the back. He sounds like my grandmother. Whether that was comforting or horrifying is anyone's guess. You spot a child, probably the barber's apprentice, feeding the parrot small pieces of stewed apple. The bird pecks politely, then squawks something suspiciously close to next. It makes sense when you think about it. In a world obsessed with signs, omens, and mood-balancing humors, the cheerful presence of a talking bird might actually be considered medicinal. If you could afford the barber, you might as well enjoy the concert. And speaking of concerts, you'll soon learn that parrots weren't just random squawkers. Some could recite prayers, sing bits of tavern songs, even offer unsolicited commentary on the attractiveness of passers-by. They were, in essence, part of the street theater of Tudor life. Just another reason to peek into the barber's window. The bird flaps its wings once, then settles again, clearly satisfied with the attention. You sit back, imagining what else this parrot has seen from its perch. Nervous gentry clutching handkerchiefs, sailors showing off tattoos, merchants haggling over the price of a shave. And now you. Funny, isn't it? Of all the strange things, in this room, the leeches in the jar, the scalpels, the smell of rosemary vinegar, the parrot might be the most human. Chatty, a little nosy, possibly judging your shoes, and it's only the beginning. You lean against the slightly warped timber of the shop's interior, the wood cool beneath your palm and smelling faintly of ancient soap and candle soot. From your new vantage, you notice something else. Tools. So many tools. Bone-handled. Knives, curved scissors, oddly shaped pincers, even what looks like a soup ladle but definitely isn't. Each one rests in its designated spot along the wall, arranged with the precision of someone who's definitely used them all. Not a comforting thought. The parrot, perhaps sensing your unease, lets out a string of rhythmic clicks followed by a perfectly timed sneeze. It might be a coincidence, but here in Tudor England, even parrots seem aware of dramatic timing. You might probably expected the barber to focus solely on hair. Maybe a beard trim, a splash of rose water, and a vaguely judgmental glance at your split ends. But no, he's a multitasker. He can shave your head and set your shoulder, all without breaking into a sweat, and he does it while being serenaded by his feathered coworker. Bloodletting was the most common treatment offered. The theory of the four humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, ran deep. Feeling sluggish? Clearly too much blood. Achy joints? Better let some blood out. Grief over your lost pet squirrel? The answer, naturally, is bloodletting. Barber-surgeons had the tools for it, and business was booming. Your eye catches a polished copper bowl on a shelf, half filled with cloudy water. It's slightly dented and has a curious lip along one side, the spout where blood would trickle. If you're lucky, the barber might have used a tourniquet. If not, well, at least there's a bird to distract you. Historians still debate whether the red and white barber pole originates solely from this bloodletting tradition. Some say the red represents blood and the white bandages. Others argue it was a marketing flourish that just happened to evoke medical horror. Either way, it's a far cry from today's gentle blue-stripe version spinning outside your neighborhood salon. But haircuts were still part of the deal. Tudors weren't overly fussy about hairstyles, but a well-trimmed beard or shorn pate could mean the difference between looking like a gentleman and looking like you just lost a fight with a hedge. And wigs, don't get started on wigs. We'll get to that later. The barber hums a tune, one clearly taught to him by the parrot, judging by its cheeky whistling harmony. It's a strangely charming duet, half barbershop and half bird opera. The parrot flaps its wings again and lets out a sound disturbingly close to hold him still, which sends the apprentice into a giggle fit. Clearly, this isn't its first week on the job. What the parrot doesn't say, but the barber knows well, is how many services go beyond the blade. Tooth removal was common. Painful, yes, but not nearly as complex as it sounds. The barber would wiggle the offending tooth back and forth using what looked like a metal corkscrew. No anesthetic, of course, just a rag to bite and the parrot's running commentary. Minor surgeries were also in scope. Abscesses, boils, cysts, they all met the same grisly fate under the knife. The shop was sometimes cleaner than your average home, which isn't saying much. Clean in this case meant someone had remembered to rinse the tools in vinegar and hang some lavender to overpower the scent of pus. You notice a wooden stool in the corner, low to the ground and oddly shaped, with handles on either side. That, you realize, is for patients who need extra support, or who tend to faint, or who require more than one apprentice to hold them down. The room's walls are lined with anatomical sketches, ink on parchment, some lovingly detailed, others clearly copied in haste from a French book. These were part of the barber's pride, proof that he studied, even if studied meant staring at a dissected hog and guessing how similar it was to a human. But the parrot is the wild card. During the worst moments, when the knife slips or the patient squeals, it steps in with a silly phrase, a warbled hymn, or a scandalous snippet overheard from the street. It's comfort in a cage, unlicensed therapy with feathers. The presence of animals in healing spaces isn't unique to Tudor times, of course, but here, in this damp-smelling room of clinking iron and whispers of camphor, the parrot is something more than an accessory. It's the shop's mascot, its mood regulator, its designated soundscape. Not every barber had one, but the ones who did, they were remembered. You picture a nobleman stepping through this very door, cloak fluttering, demanding a wart removed with discretion and haste. The parrot would glance at him with a tilted head and mutter something like, "Fancy shoes," "Odd nose," and the entire room would stifle laughter. Some say the parrots made the barber more likable. Others think they were status symbols, proof that your shop was plugged into the maritime trade, exotic goods and all. A customer might trust your skill more if you had the kind of clientele that gifted birds from Madagascar. One thing's clear. These barbers were not just men with razors. They were entrepreneurs, improvisers, and, occasionally, part-time zookeepers. The parrot swoops down briefly, glides across the room, and lands with a neat flutter on the back of the barber's chair. It ruffles its feathers, eyes you, and lets out a perfectly crisp, "all done." You're not sure if it means you, the story, or just its lunch break. But either way, it's working. You're already starting to feel the hazy calm of this strange, bustling, blood-scented little world, and it's only just begun. The barber wipes his hands on a linen cloth that's seen better centuries and gestures toward the chair with a casual flick. But you're not the one in need of treatment today, not physically at least. You're here to observe. And right now, there's a patient already in place, an older man with a face like sun-dried parchment and a suspiciously nervous twitch in his right eyebrow. Above him, the parrot croons. Its voice warbles between what might be a sea shanty and an insult, something about stinky toes and too much pudding. You suspect it's quoting a local child. The barber pulls on a pair of leather gloves, more symbolic than sterile, and reaches for a shallow bowl filled with warm water and sprigs of mint. The smell is oddly soothing. The man in the chair doesn't look soothed, but the bird is doing its part, rocking side to side, chirping a lilting tune as if the entire scene is a lullaby. This is no coincidence. Bloodletting, a standard Tudor. Treatment wasn't just unpleasant, it was deeply unsettling. Many patients fainted, some screamed, a few had spiritual awakenings they hadn't scheduled. And in the absence of anesthesia, distractions were currency. Some barber-surgeons played music. Some offered opium-laced poppy syrup, though rarely free of charge. But others, like this shop, relied on an avian assistant with impeccable comic timing. Historians still argue, as they often do, about whether the parrots were trained intentionally to soothe patients, or if it was a happy accident. One squawked phrase that made someone laugh during a painful procedure, and suddenly every barber wanted a bird. Whatever the case, by the late 1500s it was not unheard of for certain shops, particularly in bustling cities like London or Antwerp, to have birds on site as part of the customer experience. It wasn't just for giggles. There was method in the madness. Studies of human response to sound weren't exactly thriving back then, but instinct counts for something. A parrot's song, unpredictable and oddly musical, could shift focus at just the right moment, especially during, well, this. You watch the barber roll up the man's sleeve and tie a strip of linen just below the elbow. The patient winces. The parrot mimics the wince. Perfectly. It's hard not to laugh, even with the prospect of flowing bodily fluids just seconds away. The barber chooses his knife, a slim, crescent-shaped lancet honed to a shine. He holds it up to the light, the same way a jeweler might inspect a ruby. Then he leans in, murmurs something calming, and the parrot squawks, "Too late now!" You nearly lose your footing from trying not to laugh out loud. The barber doesn't flinch. He's clearly heard this bit before. The cut is quick, practiced. A few dark drops fall into the bowl below, then more. The barber watches the flow with a critical eye. Not too fast, not too slow. Just enough to balance the humors, as the old texts dictated. The man in the chair has gone pale, but he's breathing steadily. The parrot whistles a long, low note that somehow matches the man's heart rate. Either that, or you're imagining things. The apprentice is ready with clean cloths and herbal ointment. He's doing well, though his hands tremble slightly as he pats the wound dry. First day? Possibly. Or maybe he's just not used to the parrot's color commentary. You shift your weight and the floor creaks beneath you. The parrot notices and turns its head sharply, one eye on you now. "You next?" It asks, clear as bells. You shake your head. Still, you can understand the appeal. Not the procedure, no, that's madness, but the atmosphere. There's a kind of rhythm to it all, the careful movements, the murmured instructions, the occasional shriek of laughter from the bird. Even the patient, now swaddled in linen and sipping a cup of weak ale, looks vaguely pleased, or maybe just relieved to still be conscious. One fringe detail most people miss about these procedures is the ritual. Not the medical bits, but the pre- and post-treatment habits. Some clients would bring their own talismans, a feather, a polished stone, a coin engraved with a saint. Others would demand a certain song be sung, or a prayer muttered 3 times. Before the first cut. That's where the parrots came in again. Some were taught to repeat these phrases, like chirping priests in feathered vestments. It wasn't exactly theology approved, but in a world thick with folk beliefs and personal superstition, a parrot whispering, "All will heal," in Latin, could be both charming and spiritually reassuring. Whether the birds actually understood what they said is still up for debate. Some scholars argue parrots merely mimic sound without comprehension. Others believe that long exposure to patterns like commands followed by reactions grants them some associative understanding. And then there's the third camp, which suspects the birds were just trolling us the whole time. Whatever the truth, they made the experience a little less grim. You notice a second cage tucked near the back wall. Inside, a much quieter bird, blue and gray, watching everything with a kind of quiet judgment. This one doesn't speak. Yet. But its eyes flick between the barber and the parrot as though it's taking notes. Back near the chair, the older man rises slowly, pressing a coin into the barber's palm. He mutters a thanks, gives the parrot a respectful nod, and hobbles out. The apprentice follows, cleaning the chair with vinegar and a square of rough cloth. The scent mingles with mint and blood and the faint puff of feathers as the parrot settles, back into place. And just like that, the shop resets. The rhythm resumes. A new client waits near the door, wringing their hands. The parrot whistles once, then declares, "He's quite good, you know. It might be talking about the barber. Or the apprentice. Or you. You're starting to suspect the bird knows more than it lets on." Outside the barber's crooked little shop, the world is damp with fog and the clatter of hooves on cobbles, but inside, it's feathers and flame light, all caught in the syrupy pace of a day without clocks. You turn your gaze upward to the parrot, now pecking gently at a wooden perch that's been worn smooth by years of talon tapping. Its beak clicks rhythmically, almost like it's counting something. Time, customers, secret sins. You wonder briefly how this colorful character ended up in a London barber-surgeon shop in the first place. And so, as if tugged by the hand, your mind pulls you backward, back beyond the bloodletting bowl and the pomander, toward distant lands where this very parrot, or one like it, might have begun its journey. To understand why Tudor barbers had parrots, you have to understand how parrots got to Tudor England at all, which means ships and spices, and more than a few accidents involving monkeys. In the 15th and 16th centuries, European trade routes stretched like tangled ribbons across the globe. Portugal, ever ambitious, led many of the early sea expeditions down the West African coast and out toward the Indian Ocean. Along the way, sailors discovered all kinds of things that made rich men drool: nutmeg, silk, exotic woods, and yes, birds. With voices like drunk court jesters and feathers like stolen sunlight, parrots were, in essence, proof. Proof that you'd been somewhere so exotic, so unfathomably other, that even your pets had accents. These birds were often sold or traded at ports: Lisbon, Seville, Antwerp, and passed from merchant to noble to anyone flashy enough to afford one. Some survived the journey, some didn't. The ones that did, they were prized, pampered, and promptly taught to say scandalous things, or at the very least, church Latin. You follow one such bird in your mind's eye, sailing aboard a small Portuguese carrack bound for Bristol. The ship groans with damp canvas and barrels of vinegar-pickled vegetables. Below deck, in a cage nestled among sacks of peppercorns, a green-feathered parrot chirps the same 2 syllables every morning. Hola, hola. A sailor laughs. The sow. Next day, it tries hola in a thick West Country accent. Parrots adapt. Once in England, the bird may have changed hands 5 or 6 times before ending up here, swapping between court ladies, merchants, or even traveling entertainers who taught it to speak French, read, make nasal squawks while bowing dramatically. Historians still argue whether parrots were common among the middle classes or remained the toys of the elite. We know Queen Elizabeth. I had a gray parrot that reportedly shrieked, "God save the Queen," perhaps just before biting someone's ear. But references to parrots also pop up in wills, shop inventories, and letters penned by housekeepers, who were less than thrilled about cleaning bird droppings off linen curtains. You can imagine the transaction. A barber in London, reasonably successful, hears that a dockside trader is selling a talking parrot, cheap because it won't stop repeating, "Your head's too round," in an unsettling falsetto. Naturally, the barber buys it, and just like that, he becomes not just a practitioner of poultices, but a showman with a feathered gimmick. You glance at the parrot in this shop again. It seems more dignified than its imagined ancestors, less insult-hurling street jester, and more semi-retired opera singer. But you can tell it comes from a long line of boat-hardened performers. There's another wrinkle in this tale, one involving sailors, superstition, and the idea that parrots brought luck, or at least that they kept sailors sane. Long months at sea with nothing but salted fish and terrifying waves. A talking bird could mean the difference between madness and something resembling mirth. Sailors would talk to parrots. Parrots, ever, obliging, talked back. Some captains even insisted that birds be kept aboard to warn of bad weather. This is pure speculation, of course, but a parrot screeching before a storm, that'll get your crew's attention, and so these birds became more than cargo. They became companions, and their journey didn't end at port. Imagine a ship's surgeon visiting his barber friend in London. He sees the bird perched on a hook beside the leech jar and says, "You know, it's easier to bleed a man when something else is making the noise." And just like that, the trend spreads. The parrot shifts on its perch and lets out a sound halfway between a chuckle and a creak. You're starting to recognize its favorite phrases now. One of them involves ointment, and another, something about cheese shoes, which remains a mystery. It's not hard to see why this little creature captured so much attention. In a world still struggling to understand germs, electricity, and the value of washing one's hands before surgery, a bird that could talk was practically magic, and magic was marketable. Parrots became shorthand for sophistication, travel, and a good sense of humor. Owning one meant you had taste, and possibly gout, but mostly taste. Their exotic nature made them appealing to those who wanted to stand out. That included barbers, who, let's be honest, were not just competing for customers, they were competing for respect. Having a shop parrot wasn't just charming, it was clever marketing. As the parrot lets out a sleepy little chirrup, its feathers fluffed like a pillow, you notice something carved into the perch itself. Tiny letters almost faded to nothing. Bartholomew's blessing. A name, a joke, or maybe the birds. Either way, it makes you smile. Because this bird didn't just arrive. It journeyed. Through ports and storms, through merchants and monarchs, all to end up here, above a bloody chair, singing over soap and steel. And as the barber whistles a few notes, the parrot answers, pitch perfect and perfectly pleased with itself. The parrot lets out a curious trill as you lean against the paneled wall again, still warm from the morning sun. Below it, the barber stretches his arms and yawns, but not without grace. Tudor professionalism, it seems, requires flair even when one's spine is cracking. You shift your gaze across the room to a collection of trinkets and oddities on a crooked shelf above the wash basin. Alongside a mortar and pestle, a tiny book of prayers, and a dried orange pierced with cloves, you notice a bird-shaped brooch made of hammered brass. It glints when the parrot flaps its wings. Because here's the thing, in Tudor England, exotic pets weren't just entertaining. They were status. They were spectacle. They were swagger in feathered form. A nobleman with a parrot could turn more heads than one wearing silk. And for women of the court, owning a talking bird was practically a fashion statement. You recall the stories of court ladies at Whitehall carrying parrots on their wrists, the way modern influencers cradle toy dogs. Except these birds could bite and repeat secrets, which made them infinitely more dangerous. You've heard of Sir Francis Drake, mariner, swashbuckler, occasional pirate. What you may not know is that when he returned from circumnavigating the globe, he brought more than gold. Among his cargo, parrots. Historians still argue whether this was out of affection, opportunism, or a deeply British desire to make even birds queue for attention. The parrots quickly became hot commodities. Court life revolved around displays of wealth, wit, and novelty. A bird that could squawk the latest gossip or mimic Queen Elizabeth's laughter. That was better than jewelry. Back at the barber's shop, the parrot lets out a squawk so scandalous, in tone you half expect it to end with, "And then she married him." The barber raises an eyebrow. "He's been spending too much time near the apothecary," he mutters. Turns out shops like this weren't just places of medicine or grooming. They were community hubs. People lingered here, traders, travelers, housewives, even spies. And if you wanted to know who was getting an annulment, who'd mysteriously recovered from the pox, or which servant girl had vanished after a visit to the stables, well, this was the place to eavesdrop. So what happens? When you mix loose tongues with a bird that remembers everything, you get trouble. And hilarity. There are records, scattered through letters, diaries, even court documents, of parrots causing disturbances. One particularly colorful case involves a Lady Anne who nearly fainted at a banquet when a parrot at the next table chirped, "Mistress Anne loves a stable boy," in front of 20 nobles and 2 visiting bishops. The bird was summarily banned. The stable boy was reportedly promoted. It's possible, of course, that many of these stories were embellished. Gossip tends to grow wings even faster than parrots. But the central truth remains. These birds weren't just pets. They were players in the strange theater of Tudor life. Even within the walls of the barber's shop, their value went beyond entertainment. Parrots acted as gentle deterrents to the dour and discontent. Their presence softened the space, transforming it from grim necessity to something closer to a curious parlor. And if your bird could quote the Psalms, well, that was practically proof of divine favor. You peer at the parrot now, who appears to be reciting something that could almost be a hymn or a recipe. The apprentice mouths along. Either he's memorized the lines or he's the one who taught them. Maybe both. You wouldn't be surprised to learn the barber lets his bird listen to customers, then uses its mimicry to draw in repeat business. "Didn't your bird say my name last time?" a client might ask. "Yes, sir," the barber replies smoothly. He has good taste. Parrots were also diplomatic gifts. Ambassadors would present them as signs of goodwill, particularly when courting favor with monarchs who, let's say, were occasionally prone to fits of boredom. A well-timed parrot joke could ease tensions better than most envoys, and yet, even as they soared in social value, parrots lived precarious lives. Cold weather, poor diet, or an accidentally insulting mimicry of the wrong clergyman could mean a swift end. But those that survived were cherished. remembered, even buried with a touch of ceremony. One noblewoman in Kent reportedly had a tombstone carved for her African grey. "He spake with charm, and knew my name," the inscription read. And, "Yet I live, and he is gone." Honestly, same energy as most breakup poetry. The barber's parrot shifts again, now grooming the underside of its wing with a noisy rustle. You notice a few clipped feathers on the floor, bright green, surprisingly vibrant against the drabness of the straw mat. The apprentice sweeps them up with what feels like reverence. You smile. It's easy to forget, with all the talk of bloodletting and tooth-pulling, that this shop is also a kind of sanctuary, a place where pain meets care, and where a feathered mischief-maker provides just enough levity to get through the day. The parrot tilts its head and lets out a cheerful, "Very brave," directed at no one in particular. Or maybe at you. You nod, quietly grateful. Because in this sharp-edged world of blades and burdens, a little song and silliness go a long way. And sometimes, having a talking bird in the corner is the best medicine of all. The next thing to hit you is the smell. Subtle at first, but once noticed, impossible to ignore. It's sweet and spicy, like old apples soaked in clove oil and lavender. It lingers in the air, woven into the wood, caught in the fabric of the barber's apron. It competes valiantly with the usual scents of damp linen, old leather, and the faint iron tang of blood. You glance again at the shelf near the chair. Among the clutter, spoons, twine, a half-crushed bunch of dried rosemary, you spot a small, perforated orb. A pomander, of course, packed with fragrant herbs, clove-studded oranges, or sometimes, if the barber was truly optimistic, ambergris. The Tudor solution to the unbearable. Make it smell like a spice cupboard having a midlife crisis. But here's the twist. The parrot smells too. Not unpleasantly, mind you. Its feathers carry a musty, earthy scent with faint notes of whatever it last rubbed its beak on. Maybe rose oil. Or maybe the edge of a rather luxurious wig. And if you've got both pomanders and parrots in the same room, well, prepare your nose for a Renaissance perfume experience no modern candle could replicate. The Tudor-era, for all its elegance and lace collars, was a world where odor carried meaning. A pleasant scent didn't just cover foulness, it was believed to protect you. Miasma theory, the idea that disease traveled via bad air, was king. If you could outsmell the pestilence, you might just survive it. That's why pomanders were hung near windows, worn on chains, stuffed in sleeves. And in barbershops, they were often placed beside the chair to bless the patient with cloves and cinnamon as their blood spilled into the bowl. Now imagine this scene. A patient grimacing mid-extraction, clutching a handkerchief soaked in rosemary vinegar, while above them a parrot nesting near a puff of frankincense chirps, "Breathe deep, sir." It's both deeply absurd and oddly effective. You watch the apprentice grind something in a small stone mortar. "Angelica root," he says, catching your eye, "to keep the air clean." The mixture is spooned into a pouch and placed by the windowsill. The parrot flutters down, peers at it, and offers an approving whistle. Clearly, this is a bird with opinions. Historians still argue whether the fragrant environment of the barber-surgeon's shop was more for health or for business. After all, if your customers leave smelling like cloves and not like terror sweat, they're more likely to come back. That, or at least recommend you to friends without pinching their nose mid-sentence. The relationship between scent and status was complex. The wealthy doused themselves in perfumes, imported when possible, homemade when not. Rosewater was practically currency in aristocratic households. Musk, rare and exotic. Civet, don't ask where it came from. But even barbers had their own scent rituals. Barbers' soaps often included crushed herbs, bay, lavender, mint. Linen cloths were boiled with lemon rinds. The razor was wiped with scented oil before each shave. All of it added up to a multi-sensory experience. Sharp blades, clean scents, cheerful parrot. And speaking of that parrot, it's nibbling at a small dish beside the chair. A closer look reveals something odd. Dried fruit, bits of candied ginger, even a curl of orange peel. Is this a snack or a tiny bird pomander? Some barbers believed feeding their parrots fragrant treats helped purify the air. Whether this was based on science or a desperate hope to keep the bird's cage from stinking is anyone's guess. But you have to admire the effort. The parrot pauses its meal and lets out a soft series of clicks, almost like a lullaby. It hops onto the barber's shoulder and rests there, blinking slowly, its little feet curling into the thick fabric. The room seems quieter now, softer somehow. There's something profoundly soothing about this corner of Tudor life. For all its chaos, plagues, rotten teeth, street brawls, royal beheadings, here is a man with a blade, a bowl of flowers, and a bird that sings through the stink. The apprentice returns with another item, a stick of cinnamon tied with ribbon. Lady Rowena likes it, he murmurs, as if that explains everything. And maybe it does. Clients had preferences, rituals, requests. Some even brought their own pomanders or insisted on specific herbs being burned nearby. One traveling merchant, the barber tells you, refused any treatment unless licorice root was steeped on the coals, a fringe detail lost in most books. Barbers sometimes partnered with perfumers. The overlap made sense. Both dealt with the body, both curated smells, and both were frequent targets of whispered complaints when things went wrong. One misstep with a tincture and suddenly everyone smelled like pickled feet. The parrot lifts its head and lets out a perfectly timed, "Too strong." Everyone laughs. You take a deep breath. The scents are layered but not overwhelming. Mint, rosemary, clove, a whiff of soap, maybe even juniper. The barber glances toward a small cabinet, opens it, and reveals his personal store. Corked jars, filled with dried petals, crushed bark, and oils so thick they barely shift when tilted. He offers you a tiny vial. "Smell this," he says. You do. It's lavender, strong and floral, but with a smoky undertone. "For calming the nerves," he says, "especially after unpleasant procedures." He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. The parrot, not wanting to be left out, leans toward the vial and lets out a thoughtful, as if it's been asked for a professional review. The room, full of movement just moments ago, settles into a hush. The candle flickers. The mortar is still. The barber stands beside his chair like a priest before a sermon. And the parrot, nestled now on a padded perch near the window, preens quietly, bathed in the honeyed scent of clove and the dull gold of a late afternoon sunbeam. For just a moment, everything is still, fragrant, safe. The scents work their spell, wrapping the shop in invisible comfort, and you realize, for all its noise and nonsense, this is a place of ritual, relief, and a surprisingly well-fed parrot. The next patient is already seated, a merchant judging by the ink stains on his cuffs and the faint smell of stale nutmeg clinging to his coat. He fidgets, mutters about a tightness in the chest, and casts a wary glance upward at the parrot, which peers down with the unblinking intensity of someone who's just been told your credit score. You settle into a corner near a narrow window. From here, you can see both the barber at work and the parrot's perch. What you're really listening for, though, is less about the blade and more about the banter. Because in this little Tudor hub, the talk never stops. Gossip, trade, war, taxes, the latest fashion scandal involving someone's codpiece. It all passes through the barber's open doorway. And parrots? They're right there, soaking up every syllable. As the barber begins a rather careful examination of the merchant's tongue, don't ask, you catch the familiar flutter of wings and then a voice. Her stockings were redder than sin. The merchant freezes mid-say, the barber grins. Don't mind him, he says. He's got a thing for fabric. The parrot's ability to mimic phrases is one thing, but what's fascinating and oddly charming is the specificity. The bird doesn't just parrot phrases, it curates them. Snippets of gossip, half-remembered arguments, court poetry mangled into rhyme, all emerge in its high, scratchy voice. One of the more fringe details of Tudor barber shops, only hinted at in a few diaries, is how these parrots became accidental recorders of town life. Local rumors preserved not in ink but in beak. There's a semi-famous case in Ipswich. A parrot in a tavern, which doubled as a barber shop on Wednesdays, reportedly repeated a customer's private conversation about unpaid debts. The debtor was humiliated. The parrot was exiled. Historians still argue whether this was proof of bird intelligence or simply a terribly timed coincidence. You glance at the apprentice, who's whispering something to the parrot now, gently, almost conspiratorially. It responds with a trill then, with impeccable timing. "Don't tell your wife." The merchant chuckles nervously, clearly unsure whether it's a joke or a deeply targeted attack. What's truly endearing is how parrots blurred the line between pet and participant. They weren't just background noise. They were part of the community. Regulars at the shop might teach the bird something new every week. Children would visit just to hear what nonsense it had learned. Even visiting dignitaries weren't above tossing it a bit of fig in exchange for a song or scandalous sentence. And here's a thought. You're living in a time before widespread literacy. Many of the people visiting this shop can't read or write, but they remember stories. They hear them. And the parrot? It's one of the town's most unusual storytellers, a living echo chamber with feathers and an attitude. The barber pulls out a jar of something thick and greenish-gray, goose fat and crushed mint, and applies it to the merchant's temples. "For the phlegmatic imbalance," he mutters, or possibly just the weather. The parrot watches closely, then whispers, "Cold heads need warm feet." A saying, a warning, a fashion tip. Barbers often repeated these folk phrases to reassure patients, but it seems their parrots did too. That blend of superstition and chirpy comfort created a unique soundscape, equal parts charm and therapy. And in a world where superstition clung to every ailment that mattered. Remember the theory of the four humors? Well, it turns out you could diagnose someone with an excess of black bile, recommend they drink hot nettle water, and if the parrot squawked, "You'll feel better by Tuesday," they probably believed it. Even today, scholars try to untangle what these birds actually understood. Some argue they were like living tape recorders, mindless mimicry machines. Others believe they formed preferences, knew which reactions to expect. The latter group includes one particularly eccentric naturalist who spent years training a parrot to fake a sneeze on command, just to win bets. Either way, in the close quarters of a Tudor barbershop, the parrot learned by osmosis. If someone stormed in cursing about the mayor's tax collectors, the bird would repeat it. If a lady whispered about a secret rendezvous at the orchard, that might come out later during a tooth pulling, at the most inconvenient moment possible. And sometimes, just sometimes, the parrot's mimicry changed lives. There's a faded tale of a barber in Bristol whose parrot repeated the name of a missing child days before she was found. Coincidence? Likely. Miracle? Possibly. Did the parrot get extra raisins? Definitely. You refocus on the shop now. The merchant rises from the chair, a little dizzy, forehead glistening, but looking better. The barber dabs away the remaining ointment, and the parrot claps its wings together once and declares, "Much improved." The merchant offers a laugh, a few coins, and a lingering look at the bird. "Is he always like this?" he asks. The barber shrugs. "Some days he's better than my apprentice." You can't help but wonder what secrets this parrot knows. How many breakups, confessions, threats, and declarations it's heard. How many it remembers. It's not just repeating nonsense, it's repeating lives. And in that repetition, something strange happens. You start to feel like you're not just hearing the past, you're listening to it echo. The afternoon sun shifts through the wavy-glassed window panes, casting a golden sheen over the floorboards and onto the parrot's glossy feathers. It stretches one wing, as if posing for a portrait, and then, out of nowhere, squawks in a perfect mimic of a bishop's voice. "By God's mercy, not in public." The barber stops mid-sentence. The apprentice drops a handful of cloves. You, trying not to burst into laughter, catch the parrot's eye. It stares right back, proud as a magistrate who just discovered his name carved into a tavern table. It's time you heard the story, because this wasn't just any parrot. This was the infamous swearing macaw of Southwark. The barber chuckles, shakes his head, and wipes his hands on a cloth that now smells faintly of burnt thyme. "You want to know about that bird?" he says, already half laughing. "Sit down." The tale, as he tells it, begins with a nobleman, Lord Swithin, a man known for a temper like spoiled mead and a wardrobe 2 centuries ahead of his time. Lord Swithin purchased a bright red macaw off a Dutch trader in a moment of theatrical impulse. According to rumor, the bird had already learned a few phrases in Portuguese and could belch the first 2 bars of a drinking song. Naturally, it was an instant sensation at court. It perched on the man's shoulder like a living sash and chirped Latin phrases during dinner. For a while, the bird was beloved. But then came the bishop's banquet. It was supposed to be a solemn affair. Important clergy, a new chapel fund, meats carved without comment. And yet, just as the soup was served, the macaw, perched quietly on a beam above, let loose a phrase that, to quote the barber, would make a sailor blush and an executioner apologize. No one knows exactly what the bird said. Scholars speculate. Some suggest a misheard Flemish phrase involving holy breeches. Others insist it was a repeated exclamation the nobleman muttered under his breath whenever he sat down too fast. Either way, the bishop choked on his eel stew, the hostess fainted into a pie, and the bird was declared a public menace. What followed was even better. The macaw was removed from court, but instead of being silenced or sold, it was handed over to a barber in Southwark, one with a reputation for managing eccentric animals and eccentric customers. That barber? The one standing in front of you now. Oh, he was a handful, the barber says, rubbing his jaw as though reliving a particularly long Thursday. Liked to chew the string off the pomanders, once tried to marry a mirror. But, he also admits, the bird brought in customers. Everyone wanted to hear it. Children dragged their fathers in just to have a boil lanced in exchange for a performance. Sailors dropped coins just to hear the bird curse in 3 dialects. And occasionally, the bird would slip into something unexpectedly profound. It could hum a lullaby, recite a fragment of the Lord's Prayer, call for someone named Judith in a voice so plaintive it made even hardened dock workers misty-eyed. Historians still argue whether the swearing macaw was the same one later, mentioned in a bill of sale to a Kentish noblewoman who desired a pet with character. Others believe the bird met its end after insulting the wrong merchant's hat. But here in this shop, its legacy lives on. The current parrot, though, better behaved, clearly knows a few scandalous phrases itself. One particularly juicy moment occurs when it shouts, "Close the curtain," and then giggles. A sound so human you almost forget it has feathers. There's something deeply Tudor about all this, that blend of solemnity and absurdity, of reverence and ridiculousness. One minute you're praying over a wound, the next your bird is quoting bawdy poetry and singing like a monk with a hangover. Parrots blurred boundaries. They weren't just animals. They were, in a strange way, reflections. Mirrors with beaks. Whatever you said near them, whatever secrets or slips or songs, you could hear it again days later, served back to you like cold stew. It made people cautious, and it made others bold. You can imagine a nobleman testing the bird before inviting company over. Say, "Welcome, honored guest." Pause. No, not that. Just say welcome. Then 10 minutes later, as the Duchess of Norfolk steps inside, the parrot squawks, "Nice ankles." The barber shrugs. They're little jesters, but better than any fool I've ever hired. A brief silence falls. Outside, a cart rattles by. Inside, the parrot clicks softly, gently pacing its perch as if walking through memories. You wonder how much of the past this bird holds. Not just stories or phrases, but feelings, laughter, anger, affection. Could a parrot mourn, remember kindness, choose whom to trust? A fringe theory, rarely taken seriously, suggests that some parrots were considered spirit keepers in certain Tudor households, that their voices were seen as echoes of the soul. A bit of imported mysticism, perhaps. Or just a poetic way to say, "This bird knows when I'm sad." The barber offers you a look that's half smirk, half sincerity. "He's smarter than he looks," he says, scratching the bird's chin. "Listens better than most people, too." And as the parrot lets out a contented chirrup, you realize something both delightful and slightly eerie. You're being watched. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, but with uncanny, unblinking awareness. Because while everyone else eventually forgets what you say, the parrot remembers. The door creaks again, and this time it's not a weary merchant or a bruised sailor. It's two ladies. One older, her stiff collar starched high enough to cut clouds, and the other younger, with a lace-trimmed bonnet and a silk pouch clutched to her chest like it might fly away. They enter with a waft of rosewater and purpose, their eyes already scanning the shop not for razors, but for remedies. You edge sideways, giving them room. The parrot observes too, head tilting slightly to the left. "Ah," it says, low and amused. The wigs are back. If barbers were the Swiss Army knives of Tudor towns, then for women, they were something even more prized. Miracle workers of the mirror. This wasn't just about boils and bleeding. For many Tudor women, barbers offered a different kind of salvation. Beauty. The elder lady wastes no time. "Heard you carry the Italian paste," she says, placing a fat coin on the table. The barber nods, already reaching for a ceramic jar containing a mixture that smells like crushed violets and, if you're not mistaken, beeswax and bone ash. "For the dark spots," he explains softly, though some prefer lemon peel steeped in milk. The younger woman, meanwhile, is eyeing the wig stands. That's right. Barbers didn't just cut hair, they made it too. Wigs were essential. Lice were rampant, and head shaving was common enough that owning a wig wasn't just fashionable, it was survival. Blonde ones were especially prized. Fair hair was associated with youth, nobility, and just a dash of divine favor. But the real magic was in the transformation. Step in plain. Step out powdered, scented, and slightly less itchy. And if you were lucky, the parrot might throw in a compliment. Pretty curls. It sings now, as the apprentice lays out a wig with delicate reddish coils. You swear the younger woman blushes. Historians still argue whether barbers catered more to women in cities than the countryside, but evidence leans yes. Urban women had more access to trade goods, French rouge, Venetian powders, saffron oil, and a greater need to maintain appearances, especially if they were navigating court politics or marriage prospects. This shop, you realize, is like a stage as you were backstage. There's a faint powder on everything, like the ghost of a performance just ended. Hairpins, perfume bottles, bundles of dried flowers tied with string. Even the razor strop hangs neatly beside a silk scarf, embroidered with a pear. And oddly, a goose. The parrot, evidently interested in fashion critique today, squawks, "Bit much, milady." It earns a gasp from the older woman. The younger suppresses a laugh. You're starting to see a pattern here. The bird isn't just a mimic, it's a mood manager. When tension rises, its absurdity cuts through it. When things get quiet, it fills the silence. When vanity runs a little wild, it gently pokes fun. It's like having your own feathered conscience, one that doesn't mind embarrassing you in public. Barbers even kept small mirrors for clients. Cracked, cloudy, and prone to distorting your nose, but mirrors nonetheless. The younger woman peers into one now, gently tapping her forehead as if negotiating with it. "Would the elderflower tonic help here?" she asks. The barber nods. "With patience," he says. "And if not, a touch of white lead. Just a touch. You can't help but wince." White lead, yes, that was real. It made skin pale and smooth, and slowly, terrifyingly, poisonous. But at the time, it was the height of beauty, a fringe tidbit. For you. Some women even requested to be bled lightly from the temples before applying makeup, believing the pale result made cosmetics more effective. Whether that worked or just made them faint more fashionably is anyone's guess. The parrot, as if remembering a past customer, blurts out, "Don't forget the fan." A useful piece of advice, all things considered. And it's not just wigs and powder. Barbers helped with hair tonics, usually vinegar-based, spot creams, eyebrow dye, and perfumes brewed from citrus rinds, crushed petals, and the occasional alarming root. They kept lists of what worked and for whom, though whether this was scientific or pure gossip is debatable. The younger lady leans closer to the bird. "Do you like it?" she asks, holding up a ribbon she's tied around her wrist. The parrot responds, without hesitation. Lovely. By two. Even the older woman smirks at that one. There's something quietly powerful about this moment. Women in a world that often silence them, finding space, here in a barber's shop, to experiment, to be seen, to be pampered. And the parrot? It's not just a distraction. It's a presence. A voice in a place where voices mattered. You. Imagine the stories this bird has overheard. Marriage proposals and rejections. Complaints about husbands and admirers. Nervous whispers about courtly ambitions. It's like a feathered diary, never locked but rarely understood. And while the bird might chirp out nonsense most days, there's always the chance it'll drop a phrase from a long-forgotten conversation and bring someone to tears or laughter. Or both. The older woman gathers her things. The younger lingers a moment longer, feeding the parrot a crumb of cake from her pouch. Say goodbye, she whispers. The bird cocks its head and purrs. Come again, lovely. And just like that, they're gone, leaving behind a whisper of lavender and a wig slightly askew on its stand. You turn back to the barber. He's cleaning his brushes, whistling softly. The apprentice is reorganizing rouge pots by hue. And the parrot? It's staring at the door, as if replaying the encounter in its mind. You know now. In this shop, everyone has a voice, even the ones with wings. The door swings open again, this time with a gust of wind and the unmistakable scent of rain-soaked wool. A man enters, mid-30s, heavy coat, muddy boots, and an expression somewhere between hopeful and embarrassed. Tucked into his hand is something small and wrapped in linen. The barber barely glances up. Fertility charm? He asks, almost bored. The man nods, sheepish. The wife's cousin said you might have something. The parrot, clearly attuned to this sort of request, cackles. Try honey and prayer. You bite your lip to keep from laughing as the man flushes crimson. The barber, unfazed, gestures toward a cupboard near the back, one filled not with razors or wigs, but with dried herbs, wax dolls, strings of beads, and what appears to be a small bird skull strung on a chain. This is the realm of barber-surgeon. Superstition. It's easy to forget how much of Tudor medicine blurred the line between science and sorcery. Remedies came with rituals. Diagnosis came with dice, horoscopes, or gut feelings. And in this fragrant little shop filled with sharp objects and sharper-tongued birds, healing wasn't just about herbs. It was about belief. The man explains in a low voice. His wife, 3 years wed, no children. Neighbors whisper. The local priest recommended prayer. The apothecary suggested patience. But the cousin, bless her, mentioned the barber who once helped a baker conceive triplets after boiling 7 parsley stems under a full moon. Historians still argue whether such remedies were truly taken seriously or whether they served more as emotional placebos. But one thing is certain, people came. They came for the hope. And sometimes for the performance. The barber pulls out a pouch of dried sage, a nub of beeswax, and a twist of thread. Mild charm, he mutters. Shouldn't cause dreams this time. You don't ask what happened last time. The parrot shuffles. Forward, wings slightly spread for drama. Say the rhyme, it chirps. Apparently there's a rhyme. The barber rolls his eyes and recites under his breath. By time and bone, by moon and vine, let cradle swing and stars align. The man clutches the wrapped charm like it's a holy relic. The parrot tilts its head, then offers a surprisingly soft good luck. You watch him leave, grateful and nervous, as if the birdsong itself sealed the spell. This wasn't unusual. Barbers were practical men, yes, but they also trafficked in folklore. You'd be surprised how often someone asked for a poultice and a potion, and maybe a pinch of protection from curses. Take plagues, for instance. Everyone feared them. Some wore charms around their necks. Others stuffed sprigs of rosemary into their boots. And a lucky few, rumor had it, brought birds into their homes, not for decoration, but for luck. A bright feathered talisman against illness and death. A fringe belief held that parrots, because of their mimicry, could ward off evil spirits by confusing them. If a spirit entered a home and heard itself mocked by a bird, it might simply leave. or at least sulk in a corner until invited to a séance. Here in the shop, the parrot squawks, "You again?" followed by a snorting giggle. You realize it's likely quoting the barber himself from a past, less successful charm delivery. The apprentice, meanwhile, is sorting a jar of dried rose petals and murmuring about love tonics. Another popular request. Nothing too scandalous, just the hope that someone might notice your new scent, your smoother hairline, or your suspiciously youthful glow. This was a world built on signs. A sneeze at the wrong moment could ruin a wedding. A black cat crossing your path might mean nothing, or it might mean it's time to bleed from your ankle just to be safe. And the barber? He walked the line between rational fixer and local wizard, a man with a scalpel in one hand and a jar of powdered toadstool in the other. Parrots fit in perfectly. They were considered lucky by many. Not all, some deeply suspicious folks thought talking birds were unnatural, and one local tale involves a magistrate finding a woman because her parrot kept mimicking judgment. But mostly, they were symbols of fortune and vitality. Some households even placed bird cages near windows, believing the chatter would keep spirits moving and discourage ill fortune from settling in. A noisy house was a safe one. The parrot flaps once, then announces, "He'll be back." It might be a joke, or a prediction. The barber returns to cleaning his table. "You know," he says, "I once made a charm from goosebone and sunflower seeds. Worked too well. Triplets, all boys. Poor woman hasn't sat still since." He grins. You suspect at least part of the story is true. You glance again at the cabinet. Tucked behind the bottles and bundles, you spot a scrap of parchment with tiny writing. A prayer, a spell, or maybe just a shopping list that says, "More ribbon, less screaming." The parrot begins humming, slow and deliberate, a tuneless little sound that feels older than the shop itself. It's not mimicry this time, it's habit or instinct. Maybe that's what makes it feel magical, because as strange as it all is, the clove smoke and charms, the whispering remedies and odd rhymes, it somehow works. Not always in body, but often, deeply, in spirit. And tonight, as the last light filters through the dusty window, you wonder, if a bird says you'll be lucky, does it count as a prophecy? Outside, the wind picks up, blowing through the narrow London alleys like it's looking for something it lost. Inside the barber's shop, though, everything is humming along in its usual strange rhythm. Scissors snip, water simmers in a copper. Pot and the parrot, now comfortably settled on a curved perch near the window, chirps a wordless tune that somehow manages to be both cheerful and smug. You're not sure what time it is, but the sun has begun its slow descent behind the chimneyed skyline. The light softens, turns everything golden, especially the parrot, whose feathers seem almost aflame in the glow. "I'll need canaries tomorrow," the apprentice mutters, mostly to himself, as he scribbles on a slate with chalk. You lean forward. "Canaries?" you ask. "Not parrots," the barber answers without looking up. "For market," he says simply. "They sell fast and they sing sweeter." Ah, the canary trade. You follow the memory trail to the bustling bird markets of Tudor London. Open-air spaces jammed between apothecaries, grocers, and vendors yelling about turnips as if their lives depended on it. Cages stacked high, bird song piercing the air like jingles before advertisements were invented. The market smelled like hay, fruit peels, feathers, and somewhere under it all, panic. Tudors loved birds. They didn't just want to hear them, they wanted to own them. Larks, finches, nightingales, even owls. If it sang or hooted, someone probably tried to feed it breadcrumbs and teach it the Lord's Prayer. But canaries were special. Small, bright, and delightfully noisy. They became the ideal bird for indoor life. Cheaper than parrots, easier to manage, and much less likely to insult your guests. The apprentice glances up, wiping chalk dust from his hands. "Sold 3 last week," he says. "All to the same woman. Says they keep her husband from brooding. Because they sing louder than he can sulk," the parrot adds helpfully. Bird stalls at market were more than just shops. They were spectacles. Boys with whistles mimicking bird calls. Girls tossing crumbs to attract attention. traders swearing their bird had almost spoken yesterday. You could lose hours there, half hypnotized by chirps and the flutter of wings in narrow cages. Some vendors even dyed their birds with saffron or berries to make them seem more exotic. That sometimes worked. Sometimes it backfired when the bird rained red droplets onto someone's ruff. Historians still argue whether the canary craze started with actual love for the birds, or just a wave of fashionable mimicry from the Spanish court. Either way, by the late 1500s, having a caged singer in your home, especially in London, was as common as owning a ceramic jug or an opinion on Queen Elizabeth's latest gown. And yet, there was a kind of quiet joy to it. These birds brightened the city's soot-black mornings. Their music slipped through cracked windows across back gardens and alleys. A woman hanging laundry might pause to hum along. A child might whisper secrets to one through the cage bars. In barber shops, they were both merchandise and mood setters. No one screams as loud during a tooth pull when there's birdsong echoing from a side shelf. You remember reading somewhere that certain barbers even paired birds with treatments, canaries during shaves, doves during hair powdering. The parrots, of course, were reserved for more theatrical operations. Back in the shop, the parrot whistles sharply. "Too loud!" It barks at the apprentice who's accidentally dropped a pan lid. "He startles easily," the barber says, "used to live near church bells." The apprentice sets down the pan with exaggerated care this time, and the parrot gives an approving click. You ask whether the parrot minds the presence of canaries. The barber shrugs. "Thinks they're chorus singers," he says. He's the soloist. There's a small cage tucked on a shelf near the doorway, currently empty, but the leftover feathers inside are unmistakably canary, soft and pale yellow, like someone shaved sunlight. They weren't just pretty pets either. Canaries were also rumored to predict weather, detect bad smells, and warn of coming illness. One pamphlet from the 1580s claimed a man's canary did shriek most violent before his household did take sick. The claim, part observation, part sales pitch, part wishful thinking. It's easy to imagine someone leaning in close to a canary cage whispering, "You'll tell me, won't you?" Before something happens, superstitions formed in these little gaps of knowledge. When medicine failed, when prayers felt thin, when rumors moved faster than horse messengers, birds filled the silence. The parrot begins mimicking canary song. Now, badly. It whistles too low, adds an extra chirrup, then fluffs itself up proudly. "Close enough," it declares. The barber snorts. He's been practicing. You sit in the soft glow of candlelight now, aware of how cozy this all feels. Yes, it's a barber shop. There's blood on that basin and tooth fragments on that tray, but it's also warm, familiar, comforting, and a big part of that? The birds, always the birds. Canaries for music, parrots for mischief, doves for peace. Each one a fluttering soul among the steam and steel and sage-scented rags. The wind howls outside again. A shutter rattles. The parrot looks out the window and mutters, "Storm's grumpy tonight." You're not sure if that's something it heard, or just something it knows. The parrot blinks at you, slow and deliberate, and then begins repeating the same word over and over. Why, until the apprentice throws a towel at it, which it deftly avoids with the elegance of a court dancer dodging a scandal. You laugh softly, but the barber simply raises an eyebrow. "He gets like that when I bring out the anatomical drawings," he mutters, unrolling a yellowed parchment across the work table. You lean in to look. It's a sketch, rudimentary, but recognizable. A brain, labeled in Latin and in the barber's own chicken scratch English. Arrows point toward words like memory, wit, and melancholy. You can't help but wonder, is that where the bird's voice lives? Because now, the question lingers like the scent of rosemary. How do parrots talk? It's not magic, though it certainly feels like it in this candlelit shop, with its clinking jars and rustling feathers. It's biology, a quirky bit of anatomy that allows these birds to mimic the human voice with uncanny precision. The barber taps the parchment. "They've no chords," he says. "No voice box like ours. It's all air and muscle." He's mostly right. Parrots don't use vocal cords. They use something called the syrinx, a muscular chamber at the base of the windpipe. By rapidly adjusting the tension in the muscles around it, they can manipulate airflow in bizarrely complex ways. Combine that with an excellent memory, a bit of mimicry instinct, and a lifetime of listening to stressed-out humans. And voila, a bird that sounds eerily like your aunt. Historians still argue whether Tudor thinkers truly grasped this mechanism. Most likely they didn't, but they did theorize about it. A physician named Lemnius once claimed parrots speak by divine mockery, as to humble the proud who would think themselves sole possessors of reason. A bold theory, also a convenient one when the bird insulted your hat. Some scholars believed birds imitated sound through impression of vapors. Others swore parrots understood intent. A few insisted parrots were simply possessed, either by angels with a twisted sense of humor, or devils with a love for rhyme. The parrot lets out a deep, slow sigh, what, in a voice that sounds alarmingly like The Apprentice. He glares at the bird. That's my phrase. You can't help but marvel. For all the chaos and superstition, this little creature knows more than it lets on. It doesn't just parrot sounds. It waits for reactions, learns what gets a laugh, times its mimicry, and perhaps it understands the power of voice, which brings you to something even more fascinating. Parrots as memory vessels. In a time when written records were scarce and most of the population couldn't read, oral history was king. Songs, poems, and sayings passed from mouth to mouth, and occasionally from beak to beak. There are tales of parrots repeating entire verses of psalms, poems of courtship, or even nursery rhymes long after the original speaker had vanished. In some rare instances, a parrot song was the only surviving version of a local folk tune. One parish record even notes a bird that sang the dead girl's lullaby for a month entire and ceased only after her mother wept before it. Creepy? Maybe, but also strangely beautiful. The barber lifts a small cage from beneath the table. This one's learning still, he says, revealing a young parrot, gray-feathered and blinking, its eyes enormous against its tiny face. Listens more than talks, like some men I know. He chuckles and sets the cage beside the older parrot, who glances at the newcomer, fluffs its feathers, and mutters, "I'm the favorite." The younger bird chirps once, softly. Even among parrots there are hierarchies. The apprentice returns, with a bowl of warm grain mash, something between porridge and bird pudding. He likes cocoa shells, he says, placing a few dark shavings on top. Not too much. He gets mouthy. Parrots in Tudor times were often fed a strange mix. Dried fruits, seed mash, bread soaked in ale, and occasionally bits of sugared almond or crushed cocoa. Chocolate was new then, still a curiosity brought from across the sea, and many believed it had mystical properties. If it could warm a nobleman's blood, surely it could give a bird some extra flair. You watch the older parrot nibble at the mash with absolute precision. It's almost meditative. The barber, as if sensing your curiosity, says, "He speaks best at dusk." Always has. Must be the light. You nod slowly. There's something about twilight that makes everything softer. Even the bird's voice seems to settle into a gentle register now, cooing syllables like secrets. Not quite words, just sounds, with memory inside them. The barber rolls up his parchment and rubs his hands together. "They say talking birds are good luck," he says. "But I say they're better than luck. They remind you." "Of what?" "Of how strange it all is," he says. "And how much we say without thinking." And there it is. The simple truth, wrapped in barber's wisdom and bird chatter. Because in this room, filled with chalk dust, herbs, blood spots, and fading afternoon light, the parrot doesn't just echo voices. It preserves them, holds them like music boxes, tuned to laughter, to scandal, to lullabies long forgotten. The younger bird lets out a tiny squeak, then mimics the older parrot's earlier phrase, "I'm the favorite." It comes out half mumbled, but the room erupts with quiet amusement. Even the barber smiles, and for a moment, in this odd little corner of history, you feel it, the miracle of sound. the science of mimicry, and the unmistakable joy of being remembered, no matter who's doing the remembering. You sit now in a quiet lull between customers, the barber hunched over his ledger with quill in hand, the apprentice sweeping crumbs of toasted barley from the floorboards, and the parrot is chewing on a piece of dried apple and muttering fragments of several different songs at once. It's less a melody and more a collage of nonsense, until it pauses, glances at the apprentice, and declares in a startlingly clear voice, 2 parts sage, 1 part sassafras. The barber snorts without looking up. Recipe for a poultice, or a bad conversation. And just like that, you're back in it. The strange and often experimental world of Tudor remedies. The kind made not in pristine apothecaries with bubbling glass, but right here, beside a stained wooden table and a very attentive parrot. The next customer is already approaching the chair, a peddler woman with a skin condition she describes as angry at the moon and pricklier than a hedgehog at vespers. She sits, pulls her shawl closer around her shoulders, and points at the spot on her arm. Help? The barber doesn't hesitate. He opens a cabinet with practiced flair and begins to mix. A pinch of red clay, a splash of vinegar, a small spoonful of beeswax softened near the hearth. It smells earthy and slightly alarming. He adds cocoa shell sometimes, the apprentice explains, to soothe the heat. Ah yes, cocoa shells, imported from the Spanish colonies in the New World. Cocoa was still a novelty in Tudor England. Most people encountered it in tiny, precious quantities, often powdered and mixed with hot water, spices, or medicinal herbs. Its shells, the discarded outer bits, were sometimes dried and crushed for use in balms, pastes, and, on rare occasions, bizarre cures involving foot poultices or tooth shadows. Don't ask. You watch as the barber crushes the cocoa shell in a small marble mortar, mixing it with honey and what he calls infused bay water. He smears a bit on a cloth and gently presses it to the woman's arm. Keep it on till supper, he says. Then rinse with rosemary broth. The woman eyes the parrot warily. Will it talk about my rash? She asks. The bird replies, flaky but brave. In an oddly supportive tone, she leaves laughing. Historians still argue whether barber-surgeons were truly effective in treating chronic skin ailments, or whether their work mostly soothed symptoms through warmth, moisture, and placebo. But one thing is certain, the clients believed, and often belief was half the cure. It's easy to forget in our age of antiseptic creams and pharmacy queues that these remedies were communal efforts, recipes passed from grandmother to barber, to apprentice to parrot. Everyone played a role, even if their only contribution was laughter. You glance over at the parrot again. It's watching the drying poultice with interest, as if grating it for texture. It hops along its perch and begins, singing an off-key jingle that ends with the words, stir, spread, pray. The barber raises his eyebrows. That's from Mistress Greaves. She used to sing while applying chest rubs. The bird picked it up in 2 visits. The idea that a bird could learn your treatment ritual, echo it, and then pass it along is both hilarious and touching. The parrot isn't just repeating phrases, it's participating, assisting, maybe even practicing medicine in its own ridiculous way. There's a small box of old charms under the counter. The apprentice opens it briefly while searching for a clean rag, and you catch a glimpse of what's inside. Pressed lavender, a silver coin, something that looks suspiciously like a chicken bone, and a long red ribbon tied in 3 knots from the midwife, the apprentice explains. Left that when the parrot started repeating birth cries. You blink, the barber confirms it. We used to have a midwife in every Thursday. After a while, the bird started making newborn noises. Put a few clients off. Others thought it meant good luck. Fringe detail. In some Tudor towns, parrots were believed to bring on labor faster. One woman reportedly requested a parrot be placed beside her birthing chair, claiming its cheerful chatter reminded the baby to hurry. You don't know whether to laugh or nod solemnly. Meanwhile, the parrot starts pacing again. Mix, mix, simmer, it croons, in a voice uncannily similar to the apprentice's. It hops down from its perch to investigate the cocoa bowl, gives it a sniff, and sneezes dramatically. "Too much sassafras," it says, coughing for effect. "Don't sass the sassafras," mutters the barber without looking up. The oddball world of Tudor medicine is alive and well in this little room. And the bird. It's not just a narrator. It's a repository of rituals, like a feathered library with no index. You imagine a scholar centuries from now, digging through this shop's remains and finding phrases scratched into the wall. Boil until tacky. Add time to temper. Don't forget to whistle. And beneath it all, one dusty feather. That's the thing about this parrot. It's more than entertainment. It's continuity. It ties each strange treatment to the next. It sings of past ointments. It echoes failed cures. And sometimes it invents its own. As the fire in the corner pops and the light dims toward amber, the parrot clears its throat and says, "Best poultice yet. Maybe it's just being cheeky. Or maybe it knows something you don't. Either way, the room feels warmer now. Softer. Like every strange mixture and every stranger phrase has a place, especially the ones that come with feathers. It's getting later now. The golden edge of evening shifting towards something deeper, cooler, quieter. The barber lights a new taper and sets it beside the scales, casting long shadows across the room. The parrot watches the flickering flame, then mutters in an ominous tone. He returns with coins and questions. The barber glances at you and grins. That means the taxman's due. You raise an eyebrow. The parrot warns you about taxes. Sometimes, he says. Sometimes, he just wants extra raisins. And just like that, we arrive at one of the more oddly bureaucratic corners of Tudor parrot history, when exotic birds, once the sparkly novelties of court and shop, began catching the attention of something less amused, the crown's purse. See, by the late 16th century, England had gotten organized, at least about money. More trade meant more goods, spices, silks, sugar, parrots, and more goods meant more taxes. Even animals weren't safe, especially not ones that could mimic royal phrasing. Historians still argue about the specifics, but records from a few port authorities and scattered parliamentary discussions suggest that exotic birds, particularly parrots, peacocks, and squawking imports from the east, were sometimes listed in customs logs alongside textiles and preserved lemons. And if something was listed, well, someone had to pay. There's a tale of a Norwich merchant fined for undeclared parrots after attempting to hide them in crates of cinnamon bark. The birds reportedly blew their own cover by singing an English drinking song halfway through customs inspection. One London clerk even proposed an annual parrot possession levy to be imposed only on homes in city limits. The reason? To curb the scandalous mimicry of certain imported birds who do recite matters best kept private. That proposal never passed, possibly because half the clerks had parrots themselves. Still, the idea lingered, and so did a certain public awareness that parrots weren't just silly. They were valuable and taxable. You can imagine the confusion. How do you assess the value of a talking bird? By word count, vocabulary range, volume? The barber gestures toward his own feathery lodger. He's worth 10 pence at least, maybe 15 if he sings. The bishop's rant. The parrot chirps. He'll tax your teeth next. Not a bad guess. You notice now that the shop keeps a small stack of parchment near the till. One bears a scrawled list. Vinegar, 3 pints. New wig powder canary seed parrot license? The barber sees you looking and shrugs. You never know. They taxed wigs last winter. There's something oddly modern about all this. The tension between joy and regulation. You get a parrot because it's beautiful, or hilarious, or sacred. Then someone in power notices you're smiling too freely and decides that must cost something. In fact, there's evidence that during certain winters, when grain prices soared and tempers ran short, parrots were briefly viewed as luxuries bordering on offense. One pamphlet titled, "Of Proper Priorities in Times of Want," rails against frivolous animals kept by those who ought to feed their neighbors instead. It includes a woodcut of a rather smug-looking parrot wearing a tiny crown. The artist may have had an axe to grind. Not everyone resented the birds, of course. Some customs officers reportedly accepted bribes in the form of clever recitations, meaning, the bird did the bribing for you. One notorious parrot named Cinnamon Jack apparently secured passage into England by quoting Psalm 23 and offering the inspector a sip of truth. Whether that's true or just sailor folklore, well, this is a world where people trusted charms against the plague and believed birds could see ghosts. The barber sighs and rubs his shoulder. We used to joke, the king wants your coin, your cloth, and your cockerel. But not your curses. Leave those to the parrots. The parrot agrees. Curses cost extra. You smile. Even here, amid the scalpels and pomanders, you can feel the quiet resistance. Ordinary people preserving. Something absurd and joyful, even as the weight of law tried to weigh it down. There's a knock at the door. The barber raises an eyebrow. That's not a customer knock, he says. A man enters, soaked from the drizzle, carrying a scroll tucked into his sleeve. He eyes the bird first, then the jars of herbs. Evening, he says. I'm here on behalf of the parish council. Late. For a trim, the barber mutters. Just checking inventory, the man says, glancing around. Curious what's being imported. Birds, goods, licenses. The parrot, sensing tension, begins humming a slow, tuneless song. Then, just as the man nears the ledger, it squawks. No coin, no crown, no cut. The official stops, glares, then slowly cracks a smile. I had one once, he admits. Could say my full name and insult my brother's wife. The barber doesn't respond, but the atmosphere shifts. After a brief inspection, the man nods, adjusts his coat, and mutters something about no infraction noted. Then he leaves, just as quickly as he arrived. The barber exhales. You see, he says, looking at the parrot, still earning your keep. The bird bows. Royal advisor, reasonable rates. As the room relaxes, you realize the parrot isn't just a companion or an oddity. It's protection. Not in the magical sense, not entirely, but in the way that anything honest, distracting, and strange can be protective. A buffer against tedium, against sorrow, even against bureaucracy. You look again at the bird, now preening one wing with fastidious care. He doesn't care about taxes. He doesn't know about laws, but he knows the room. He knows when to joke and when to sing, and sometimes that's enough to keep the world turning. The candle's flame has softened now, swaying in rhythm with the draft that creeps in under the door. Outside, London mutters in its sleep. Carts groan, boots splash in puddles, a dog barks at a puddle or a ghost. Inside, though, the world feels still, familiar. Feathers and flicker in the slow rasp of the barber's whetstone gliding across a blade. You've lost track of time, but the parrot hasn't. Closing time, it announces with smug confidence, as if it runs the shop. And in a way, maybe it does. The barber grunts and stretches his back, then opens the window just a crack to let in the night air. He's never wrong, he says. Knows when the day is over before I do. You take a final glance around the room. There's a piece to the mess now. Folded linens, stacked jars, feathers swept into a neat pile. The barber pours warm water into a basin and begins rinsing the instruments, each one cleaned not just out of habit but out of ritual. This was never just a day of trade. It was a day of stories, worries, laughter, and bits of whispered history that only the walls and the parrot will remember. And the parrot, well, he's no longer squawking. He's murmuring to himself, quietly threading syllables together, testing new shapes in the back of his throat. You can just barely make out the words. Once there was, a beginning perhaps, or the end of something already told. The barber reaches for the last cloth, drying a silver lancet that's older than he is. You know, he says softly. I got him from a sailor who said he'd seen cities where birds teach men how to pray. You raise your eyebrows. Of course he was drunk and missing 2 fingers, the barber adds, but it stuck with me. That's the thing about parrots. They stick with you. They outlive the original joke, the scandal, the secret. Long after the nobleman dies, long after the shop changes hands, long after this building crumbles and becomes a tavern or a bakery or a very confused insurance office, the memory of a talking bird stays in the air. Historians still argue whether the birds knew what they were saying or simply repeated noise for the thrill of it. But here, in the hushed light of a closing shop, you get the sense it doesn't matter. Meaning isn't always about intent. Sometimes it's about presence. The parrot has perched lower now, feathers fluffed, one eye half closed. Sleepy, it mumbles. The apprentice, who's been quietly folding linen, looks up. He always says that before the shop closes, even when we forget. Especially when we forget, the barber says. And maybe that's it. This parrot, with its nonsense phrases and perfect mimicry, has witnessed more than most people in this parish. It's heard confessions no priest ever would, learned lullabies that have vanished from every mouth but its own. It has laughed at kings, sung with children, and interrupted a bishop's sermon in the most unfortunate way. But mostly it has been here, listening, remembering, replaying. Not every witness writes a history book. Some just sit on a perch and whistle, it back in fragments, and as the shutters close, the final basin is dried, and the last candle burns low, you realize the parrot is still humming. Softly now, almost like breathing. The barber runs a hand through his hair, nods at you, and says, "Well, he'll tell this day again. Might not be in order, but he'll tell it." The bird opens one eye. "Nice day," it says. You nod. "Yes," you reply. It really was. And then the shop dims into stillness. And now, as the last flickers of candlelight melt into the corners of the room, and the gentle creak of wood settles into silence, you can let yourself drift. You are no longer standing in a barber's shop full of scent and stories. You are somewhere softer now, wrapped in the warmth of remembered laughter and gentle nonsense. The whisper of feathers brushing wood, the faint echo of a phrase spoken just once, and then again, until it becomes something dreamlike. Outside, the city still shifts in size, but in here, it's all stillness. No more blades, no more poultices or gossip or tasks, just a sleepy parrot tucked under one wing, murmuring the same phrase to itself like a lullaby worn smooth by time. "Nice day," it says again, and you believe it. Let the images from the day fade. Clove-scented cloths, cocoa poultices, the oddball poetry of a bird with a better memory than anyone you've ever met. Let them settle like dust in a warm sunbeam. There's no need to hold them tightly. They'll be remembered. Even if not by you. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the parrot's soft rhythm carry you out to sea, into sleep, into a story you don't have to finish tonight. You've heard enough. The rest, the bird will remember for you.